Salute, what's going on, everybody? Really quick, what's going on? Let me double check everything, see if everything's in motion right now. Um, yeah, let's go, let's go. Salute to everybody, top of the afternoon. If this is your first time here, this is the New Era Young Lord Book Club, also known as the AfroTaino Book Club. If this is your first time, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen, sharing this live, it's just showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to get the message out to the masses. Salute to everybody tapping in right now. Remember, we are live on YouTube right now, so if there's anything you guys miss, any of the prior chapters you guys missed, do me a favor, go back and catch up. We are definitely live on both platforms. Don't forget, all gifts and donations will be going to the Young Lords Back the Borinquen Project. We will be in Yabucoa, Puerto Rico, October 6th to October 15th at the Marco Sanchez Community Center. So if you guys want to go support, go look up the Marco Sanchez Community Center. The link is in the bio for the GoFundMe. But without further ado, let's pick up where we left off. We're going over the Huey P. Newton Reader right here and right here. So if you guys want to continue to tap the screen, share this live, let's shake up the algorithm on both platforms so that way we can be able to have more participation and be able to reach more people. And again, I do believe in free education. So by tapping the screen and sharing this live, it's guaranteed people are going to tap in. Let's get it.
Speech delivered at Boston College, November 18, 1970. Power to the people, brothers and sisters. I would like to thank you for my presence here tonight because you are responsible for it. I would be in a maximum security penitentiary if it were not for the power of the people. I would like to petition you to do the same for Bobby Seale, our chairman, for Erica Huggins, for Angela Davis, for the New York 21 and the Soledad Brothers, for all political prisoners and prisoners of war. On the 28th and 29th of November, we will have a People's Revolutionary Constitutional Convention in Washington, D.C. We cannot have that convention if the people do not come. After all, the people are the makers of world history and responsible for everything. How can we have a convention if we have no people? Some believe a people's convention is possible without the people being there. As I recall, that was the case in 1777. Tonight, I would like to outline for you the Black Panther Party's program and explain how we arrived at our ideological position and why we feel it necessary to institute a 10-point program.
Let's tap that
A
screen.
10-point program is not revolutionary in itself, nor is it reformist. It is a survival program. We, the people, are threatened with genocide because racism and fascism are rampant in this country and throughout the world.
Listen to the
And
relevancy.
the ruling circle in North America is responsible. We intend to change all of that, and in order to change it, there must be a total transformation. But until we can achieve that total transformation, we must exist. In order to exist, we must survive. Therefore, we need a survival kit, the 10-point program. It is necessary for our children to grow up healthy with functional and creative minds. They cannot do this if they do not get the correct nutrition. That is why we have a breakfast program for children. We also have community health programs. We have a busing program.
Thank you.
We call it the Bus for Relatives and Parents of Prisoners. We realize that the fascist regime that operates the prisons throughout America would like to do their treachery in the dark.
Listen.
But if we get the relatives, parents, and friends to the prisons, they can expose the treachery of the fascists. This, too, is a survival program. We must not regard our survival programs as an answer to the whole problem of oppression.
Thank you.
We don't even claim it to be a revolutionary program. Revolutions are made of sterner stuff. We do say that if the people are not here, revolution cannot be achieved.
That's a
For
fact.
the people and only the people make revolutions.
You hear that?
The theme of our Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention is survival through service to the people. At our convention, we will present our total survival program. It is a program that works very much like the first aid kit that is used when a plane falls and you find yourself in the middle of the sea on a rubber raft. You need a few things to last until you can get to the shore, until you can get to that oasis where you can be happy and healthy. If you do not have the things necessary to get you to that shore, then you will probably not exist. At this time, the ruling circle threatens us to the extent that we are afraid that we might not exist to see the next day or see the revolution. The Black Panther Party will not accept the total destruction of the people. As a matter of fact, we have drawn a line of demarcation, and we will no longer tolerate fascism, aggression, brutality, and murder of any kind.
Listen up.
We will not sit around and allow ourselves to be murdered. Each person has an obligation to preserve himself. If he does not preserve himself, then I accuse him of suicide, reactionary suicide, because reactionary conditions will have caused his death.
Listen.
If we do nothing, we are accepting the situation and allowing ourselves to die. We will not accept that. If the alternatives are very narrow, we still will not sit around. We will not die the death of the Jews in Germany. We would rather die the death of the Jews in Warsaw. Where there is courage, where there is self-respect and dignity, there is a possibility that we can change the conditions and win. This is called revolutionary enthusiasm, and it is the kind of struggle that is needed in order to guarantee a victory.
Salute to everybody tapping in this afternoon. Peace and blessings for everybody joining. We are going over the Huey P. Newton Reader. This is the speech he gave in Boston College, November 18th, 1970. This is a speech he gave in November 18th, 1970. This is Huey P. Newton. Let's tap the screen, share this live. And for everybody on TikTok, don't forget we're also live on YouTube. So if you guys missed any of the prior chapters or even some of the other books we've done in the past and some of the books we're going to do in the future, you can always catch up. So tap that screen on both platforms, share this live, and I appreciate all the love and support. Let's get back into it.
If we must die, then we will die the death of a revolutionary suicide that says, if I am put down, if I am driven out, I refuse to be swept out with a broom. I would much rather be driven out with a stick, because if I am swept out with the broom, it will humiliate me, and I will lose my self-respect. But if I am driven out with the stick, then at least I can claim the dignity of a man, and die the death of a man, rather than the death of a dog. Of course, our real desire is to live, but we will not be cowed. We will not be intimidated.
Nope.
I would like to explain to you the method that the Black Panther Party used to arrive at our ideological position, and more than that, I would like to give to you a framework or a process of thinking that might help us solve the problems and the contradictions that exist today. Before we approach the problem, we must get a clear picture of what is really going on.
Listen, get your pens and pad ready. Get your pens and pad. We are live at class. This is a session. Get your notepads, your pens, your pencils, your crayons, whatever you decide to write with, and let's jot some of this stuff down, guys.
Divorced from the attitudes and emotions that we usually project into a situation. We must be as objective as possible without accepting dogma, letting the facts speak for themselves. But
that's a problem that our generation today has. And not for nothing, I'm going to go back 30 seconds so we can hear it loud and clear.
Give to you a framework or a process of thinking that might help us solve the problems and the contradictions that exist today. Before we approach the problem, we must get a clear picture of what is really going on. A clear image divorced from the attitudes and emotions that we usually project into a situation. We must be as objective as possible without accepting dogma, letting the facts speak for themselves.
Listen.
But we will not remain totally objective. We will become subjective in the application of the knowledge received from the external world. We will use the scientific method to acquire this knowledge, but we will openly acknowledge our ultimate subjectivity. Once we apply knowledge in order to will a certain outcome, our objectivity ends and our subjectivity begins. We call this integrating theory with practice, and this is what the Black Panther Party is all about. In order to understand a group of forces operating at the same time, science developed what is called the scientific method. One of the characteristics or properties of this method is disinterest. Not uninterest, but disinterest. No special interest in the outcome. In other words, the scientist does not promote an outcome, he just collects the facts.
Listen.
Nevertheless, in acquiring his facts, he must begin with a basic premise. Most basic premises stem from a set of assumptions because it is very difficult to test a first premise without these assumptions. After an agreement is reached on certain assumptions, an intelligent argument can follow. For then, logic and consistency are all that is required to reach a valid conclusion. Tonight, I ask you to assume that an external world exists. An external world that exists independently of us. The second assumption I would like for you to make is that things are in a constant state of change, transformation, or flux.
Listen.
With agreement on these two assumptions, we can go on with our discussion. The scientific method relies heavily on empiricism. But the problem with empiricism is that it tells you very little about the future. It tells you only about the past, about information which you have already discovered through observation and experience.
Listen up.
It always refers to past experience. Long after the rules of empirical knowledge had been ascertained, a man by the name of Karl Marx integrated these rules with a theory developed by Immanuel Kant called rationale. Kant called his process of reasoning pure reason because it did not depend on the external world. Instead, it only depended on consistency in manipulating symbols in order to come up with a conclusion based upon reason. For example, in this sentence, if the sky is above my head, when I turn my head upwards, I will see the sky. There is nothing wrong with the conclusion. As a matter of fact, it is accurate. But I haven't said anything about the existence of the sky. I said, if. With rationale, we are not dependent upon the external world. With empiricism, we can tell very little about the future. So what will we do? What Marx did. In order to understand what was happening in the world, Marx found it necessary to integrate rationale with empiricism. He called his concept dialectical materialism. If, like Marx, we integrate these two concepts or these two ways of thinking, not only are we in touch with the world outside us, but we can also explain the constant state of transformation. Therefore, we can also make some predictions about the outcome of certain social phenomena that is not only in constant change, but also in conflict. Marx, as a social scientist, criticized other social scientists for attempting to explain phenomena, or one phenomenon, by taking it out of its environment, isolating it, putting it into a category, and not acknowledging the fact that once it was taken out of its environment, the phenomenon was transformed. For example, if in a discipline such as sociology we study the activity of groups, how they hold together and why they fall apart, without understanding everything else related to that group, we may arrive at a false conclusion about the nature of the group. What Marx attempted to do was to develop a way of thinking that would explain phenomena realistically. In the physical world, when forces collide, they are transformed. When atoms collide in physics, they divide into electrons, protons, and neutrons, if I remember correctly. What happened to the atom? It was transformed. In the social world, a similar thing happens. We can apply the same principle. When two cultures collide, a process or condition occurs which the sociologists call acculturation, the modification of cultures as a result of their contact with each other. Marx called the collision of social forces or classes a contradiction. In the physical world, when forces collide, we sometimes call it just that, a collision. For example, when two cars meet head-on, trying to occupy the same space at the same time, both are transformed. Sometimes other things happen. Had those two cars been turned back to back and sped off in opposite directions, they would not be a contradiction.
Listen.
They would be contrary, covering different spaces at different times. Sometimes when people meet, they argue and misunderstand each other because they think they are having a contradiction when they are only being contrary. For example, I can say the wall is 10 feet tall, and you can say the wall is red, and we can argue all day thinking we are having a contradiction when actually we are only being contrary. When people argue, when one offers a thesis and the other offers an antithesis, we say there is a contradiction and hope that if we argue long enough, provided that we agree on one premise, we can have some kind of synthesis. Tonight, I hope I can have some form of agreement or synthesis with those who have criticized the Black Panther Party.
Listen up.
I think that the mistake is that some people have taken the apparent as the actual fact in spite of their claims of scholarly research and following the discipline of dialectical materialism. They fail to search deeper, as the scientist is required to do, to get beyond the apparent and come up with the more significant. Let me explain how this relates to the Black Panther Party.
Break it down.
The Black Panther Party is a Marxist-Leninist party because we follow the dialectical method and we also integrate theory with practice. We are not mechanical Marxists and we are not historical materialists. Some people think they are Marxists when actually they are following the thoughts of Hegel. Some people think they are Marxist-Leninists, but they refuse to be creative and are therefore tied to the past.
Listen, tap that screen, share this live. I appreciate everybody participating this afternoon on YouTube and on TikTok. And everybody on TikTok, don't forget we're live on YouTube. So if you missed out on any of the prior chapters, you can always tap in on YouTube and go catch up. Salute to everybody. Remember, all gifts and donations will be going to the Young Lords Back to Borinquen Project. We will be in Yabucoa, Puerto Rico at the Marco Sanchez Community Center from October 6th to the 15th. So salute to everybody participating, contributing. Much blessings to everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
They are tied to a rhetoric that does not apply to the present set of conditions. They are tied to a set of thoughts that approaches dogma, what we call flunkyism. Marx attempted to set up a framework which could be applied to a number of conditions. And in applying this framework, we cannot be afraid of the outcome because things change and we must be willing to acknowledge that change because we are objective. If we are using the method of dialectical materialism, we don't expect to find anything the same even 1 minute later because 1 minute later is history. If things are in a constant state of change, we cannot expect them to be the same. Words used to describe old phenomena may be useless to describe the new. And if we use the old words to describe new events, we run the risk of confusing people and misleading them into thinking that things are static. In 1917, an event occurred in the Soviet Union that was called a revolution. Two classes had a contradiction and the whole country was transformed. In this country, 1970, the Black Panther Party issued a document. Our Minister of Information, Eldridge Cleaver, who now is in Algeria, wrote a pamphlet called On the Ideology of the Black Panther Party. In that work, Eldridge Cleaver stated that neither the proletarians nor the industrial workers carry the potentialities for revolution in this country at this time. He claims that the left wing of the proletarians, the lumpen proletarians, have that revolutionary potential. And in fact, acting as the vanguard, they would carry the people of the world to the final climax of the transformation of society. It has been stated by some people, by some parties, by some organizations, by the Progressive Labor Party, that revolution is impossible. How can the lumpen proletarians carry out a successful socialist transformation when they are only a minority? And in fact, how can they do it when history shows that only the proletarians have carried out a successful social revolution? I agree that it is necessary for the people who carry out a social revolution to represent the popular majority's interests. It is necessary for this group to represent the broad masses of the people. We analyzed what happened in the Soviet Union in 1917. I also agree that the lumpen proletarians are the minority in this country. No disagreement. Have I contradicted myself? It only goes to show that what's apparent might not actually be a fact. What appears to be a contradiction may be only a paradox. Let's examine this apparent contradiction. The Soviet Union in 1917 was basically an agricultural society with a very large peasantry. A set of social conditions existing there at that time was responsible for the development of a small industrial base. The people who worked in this industrial base were called proletarians. Lenin, using Marx's theory, saw the trends. He was not a historical materialist, but a dialectical materialist, and therefore very interested in the ever-changing status of things. He saw that while the proletarians were a minority in 1917, they had the potential to carry out a revolution because their class was increasing and the peasantry was declining. That was one of the conditions. The proletarians were destined to be a popular force. They also had access to the properties necessary for carrying out a socialist revolution. In this country, the Black Panther Party, taking careful note of the dialectical method, taking careful note of the social trends and the ever-changing nature of things, sees that while the lumpen proletarians are the minority and the proletarians are the majority, technology is developing at such a rapid rate that automation will progress to cybernation, and cybernation probably to technocracy. As I came into town, I saw MIT over the way.
This was November, let me give you the exact date again, November 18th, 1970, and we are in 2024, and you can't tell me a lot of what he's saying back then doesn't correlate with what's going on right now. You can't.
The circle remains in power. It seems to me that capitalists will continue to develop their technological machinery because they are not interested in the people. Therefore, I expect from them the logic that they have always followed: to make as much money as possible and pay the people as little as possible until the people demand more and finally demand their heads. If revolution does not occur almost immediately, and I say almost immediately because technology is making leaps, it made a leap all the way to the moon. And if the ruling circle remains in power, the proletarian working class will definitely be on the decline because they will be unemployables and therefore swell the ranks of the lumpens, who are the present unemployables. Every worker is in jeopardy because of the ruling circle, which is why we say that the lumpen proletarians have the potential for revolution, will probably carry out the revolution, and in the near future will be the popular majority. Of course, I would not like to see more of my people unemployed or become unemployables, but being objective, because we are dialectical materialists, we must acknowledge the facts. Marx outlined a rough process of the development of society. He said that society goes from a slave class to a feudalistic class structure to a capitalistic class structure to a socialistic class structure and finally to communism. Or in other words, from capitalist state to socialist state to non-state, communism. I think we can all agree that the slave class in the world has virtually been transformed into the wage slave. In other words, the slave class in the world no longer exists as a significant force, and if we agree to that, we can agree that classes can be transformed literally out of existence. If this is so, if the slave class can disappear and become something else, or not disappear but just be transformed and take on other characteristics, then it is also true that the proletarians or the industrial working class can possibly be transformed out of existence. Of course, the people themselves would not disappear, they would only take on other attributes. The attribute that I am interested in is the fact that soon the ruling circle will not need the workers, and if the ruling circle is in control of the means of production, the working class will become unemployables or lumpens. That is logical. That is dialectical. I think it would be wrong to say that only the slave class could disappear. Marx was a very intelligent man. He was not a dogmatist. Once he said, "One thing I'm not a Marxist." In those words, he was trying to tell the Progressive Labor Party and others not to accept the past as the present or the future, but to understand it and be able to predict what might happen in the future, and therefore act in an intelligent way to bring about the revolution that we all want.
Those are
After taking
bars.
those things into consideration,
Those are bars right there. Like, those are bars.
and the world is transformed, we need some new definitions. For if we keep using the old terms, people might think the old situation still exists. I would be amazed if the same conditions that existed in 1917 were still existing today. You know, Marx and Lenin were pretty lazy dudes when it came to working for somebody. They looked at toil, working for your necessities, as something of a curse. And Lenin's whole theory, after he put Marx's analysis into practice, was geared to get rid of the proletarians. In other words, when the proletarian class or the working class seized the means of production, they would plan their society in such a way as to be free from toil. As a matter of fact, Lenin saw a time in which man could stand in one place, push buttons, and move mountains. It sounds to me as though he saw a proletarian working class transformed and in possession of a free block of time to indulge in productive creativity, to think about developing their universe so that they could have the happiness, the freedom, and the pleasure that all men seek and value. Today's capitalist has developed machinery to such a point that he can hire a group of specialized people called technocrats. In the near future, he will certainly do more of this. And the technocrat will be too specialized to be identified as a proletarian. In fact, that group of technocrats will be so vital, we will have to do something to explain the presence of other people. We will have to come up with another definition and reason for existing. But we must not confine our discussion to theory. We must have practical application of our theory to come up with anything worthwhile. In spite of the criticism that we have received from certain people, the party has a practical application of its theories. Many of our activities provide the working class and the unemployed with a reason and a means for existing in the future. The people will not disappear. Not with our survival programs, they will not.
Listen.
They will still be around. The Black Panther Party says it is perfectly correct to organize the proletarians because after they are kicked out of the factory and are called unemployable or lumpen, they still want to live. And in order to live, they have to eat. It is in the proletarian's own best interest to seize the machinery that he has made in order to produce in abundance, so he and his brethren can live. We will not wait until the proletarian becomes the lumpen proletarian to educate him. Today we must lift the consciousness of the people. The wind is rising and the river's flowing. Times are getting hard and we can't go home again. We can't go back to our mother's womb, nor can we go back to 1917. The United States, or what I like to call North America, was transformed at the hands of the ruling circle from a nation to an empire. This caused a total change in the world, because no part of an interrelated thing can change and leave everything else the same. So when the United States, or North America, became an empire, it changed the whole composition of the world.
And I think that's the difference between today's activism and then our elders, our the ones who let the foundations for us. They understood the domestic politics and the policies and what were going on locally, but they also understood the importance of international politics and also the intersectionalities between geopolitical issues globally. So when you can understand these dynamics globally, you can understand that geopolitics is what sets the foundation for local and domestic politics, no matter where you're at. That's what they knew more about than what we know today. Today we get so focused on self and our history and what's going on around us, not understanding that it is a broader issue, that it has so much connection and intersectionalities that they affect one another. But let's get back to the book.
There were other nations in the world, but empire means that the ruling circle who lives in the empire, the imperialists, control other nations. Now, some time ago, there existed a phenomenon I call primitive empire. An example of that would be the Roman Empire, because the Romans controlled all of what was thought to be the known world. In fact, they did not know all of the world. Therefore, some nations still existed independent of it. Now, probably all of the world is known. The United States, as an empire, necessarily controls the whole world, either directly or indirectly.
Listen.
If we understand dialectics, we know that every determination brings about a limitation, and every limitation brings about a determination.
For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction, whether you agree with it or disagree with it.
In other words, while one force may give rise to one thing, it might crush other things, including itself. We might call this concept the negation of the negation. So while in 1917 the ruling circle created an industrial base and used the system of capitalism, they were also creating the necessary conditions for socialism. They were doing this because in a socialist society, it is necessary to have some centralization of the wealth, some equal distribution of the wealth, and some harmony among the people. Now, I will give you roughly some characteristics that any people who call themselves a nation should have. These are economic independence, cultural determination, control of the political institutions, territorial integrity, and safety. In 1966, we called our party a Black Nationalist Party. We called ourselves Black Nationalists because we thought that nationhood was the answer. Shortly after that, we decided that what was really needed was revolutionary nationalism. That is, nationalism plus socialism. After analyzing conditions a little more, we found that it was impractical and even contradictory. Therefore, we went to a higher level of consciousness. We saw that in order to be free, we had to crush the ruling circle. And
there's levels to this shit.
Therefore, we had to unite with the peoples of the world. So we called ourselves internationalists. We sought solidarity with the peoples of the world. We sought solidarity with what we thought were the nations of the world. But then what happened? We found that because everything is in a constant state of transformation, because of the development of technology, because of the development of the mass media, because of the firepower of the imperialist, and because of the fact that the United States is no longer a nation but an empire, nations could not exist, for they did not have the criteria for nationhood.
Listen.
Their self-determination, economic determination, and cultural determination has been transformed by the imperialists and the ruling circle.
Yo, free Puerto Rico, guys. Free fucking Puerto Rico. I just have to say that because when he says all that shit drives my fucking, boils my blood, man. Because if you listening to what he's saying, if you listen to this,
nations. We found that in order to be internationalists, we had to be also nationalists, or at least acknowledge nationhood. Internationalism, if I understand the word, means the interrelationship among a group of nations. But since no nation exists, and since the United States is in fact an empire, it is impossible for us to be internationalists. These transformations and phenomena require us to call ourselves intercommunalists.
And we got to understand, empires don't have to recognize nations if they don't want to. All right? Empires do not have to recognize nations if they do not want to. That's why I said what I said. Free Puerto Rico.
Those nations have been transformed into communities of the world. The Black Panther Party now disclaims internationalism and supports intercommunalism. Marx and Lenin felt, with the information they had, that when the non-state finally came to be a reality, it would be caused or ushered in by the people and by communism. A strange thing happened. The ruling reactionary circle, through the consequence of being imperialists, transformed the world into what we call reactionary intercommunalism.
Listen up.
They laid siege upon all the communities of the world, dominating the institutions to such an extent that the people were not served by the institutions in their own land.
Nope.
The Black Panther Party would like to reverse that trend and lead the power of the world into the age of revolutionary intercommunalism. This would be the time when the people seize the means of production and distribute the wealth and the technology in an egalitarian way to the many communities of the world. We see very little difference in what happens to a community here in North America and what happens to a community in Vietnam. We see very little difference in what happens, even culturally, to a Chinese community in San Francisco and a Chinese community in Hong Kong. We see very little difference in what happens to a black community in Harlem and a black community in South Africa, a black community in Angola and one in Mozambique. We see very little difference. So, what has actually happened is that the non-state has already been accomplished, but it is reactionary. A community, by way of definition, is a comprehensive collection of institutions that serve the people who live there.
Listen up.
It differs from a nation because a community evolves around a greater structure that we usually call the state. And the state has certain control over the community if the administration represents the people or if the administration happens to be the people's commissar.
But if the state is controlled by an empire, how much power does the state really have? And is the state really controlling the dynamics of its civilians who reside within that nation? No, the empire does. The empire controls every aspect of life for those nations. They dictate what they're going to receive, how they're going to receive it, what money they get, how they get the money, how they could do business, what industries they can actually participate in. This is why I say it. There's levels to this shit. Whether we agree with it or don't agree with it, we have to understand how it works so we can dismantle it at its core. Not just the little trinkets that is on the armor.
It is not so at this time, so there's still something to be done. I mentioned earlier of the negation of the negation. I mentioned earlier the necessity for the redistribution of wealth. We think that it is very important to know that as things are in the world today, socialism in the United States will never exist. Why? It will not exist because it cannot exist. It cannot at this time exist any place in the world. Socialism would require a socialist state, and if a state does not exist, how could socialism exist? So how do we define certain progressive countries such as the People's Republic of China? How do we describe certain progressive countries, or communities as we call them, as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? How do we define certain communities such as North Vietnam and the provisional government in the South? How do we explain these communities if in fact they too cannot claim nationhood? We say this. We say they represent the people's liberated territory. They represent a community liberated. But that community is not sufficient. It is not satisfied, just as the National Liberation Front is not satisfied with the liberated territory in the South. It is only the groundwork and preparation for the liberation of the world, seizing the wealth from the ruling circle, equal distribution and proportional representation in an intercommunal framework. This is what the Black Panther Party would like to achieve with the help of the power of the people, because without the people, nothing can be achieved. I stated that in the United States, socialism would never exist. In order for a revolution to occur in the United States, you would have to have a redistribution of wealth, not on a national or an international level, but on an intercommunal level. Because how can we say that we have accomplished revolution if we redistribute the wealth just to the people here in North America, when the ruling circle itself is guilty of trespass de bonis asportatis? That is, they have taken away the goods of the people of the world, transported them to America, and used them as their very own. In 1917, when the revolution occurred, there could be a redistribution of wealth on a national level because nations existed. Now, if you talk in terms of planning an economy on a worldwide level, on an intercommunal level, you are saying something important. That the people have been ripped off very much like one country being ripped off. Simple reparation is not enough because the people have not only been robbed of their raw materials, but of the wealth accrued from the investment of those materials, an investment which has created the technological machine. The people of the world will have to have control, not a limited share of control for X amount of time, but total control forever. In order to plan a real intercommunal economy, we will have to acknowledge how the world is hooked up. We will also have to acknowledge that nations have not existed for some time. Some people will argue that nations still exist because of the cultural differences. By way of definition, just for practical argument, culture is a collection of learned patterns of behavior. Here in the United States, black people, Africans, were raped from the mother country, and consequently we have literally lost most of our African values. Perhaps we still hold on to some surviving Africanisms, but by and large you can see the transformation which was achieved by time and the highly technological society whose tremendous mass media functions as an indoctrination center. The ruling circle has launched satellites in order to project a beam across the earth and indoctrinate the world. And while there may be some cultural differences, these differences are not qualitative, but quantitative. In other words, if technology and the ruling circle go on as they are now, the people of the world will be conditioned to adopt Western values. I think Japan is a good example. The differences between people are getting very small, but again, that is in the interest of the ruling circle. I do not believe that history can be backtracked. If the world is really that interconnected, then we have to acknowledge that and say that in order for the people to be free, they will have to control the institutions of their community and have some form of representation in the technological center that they have produced. The United States, in order to correct its robbery of the world, will have to first return much of what it has stolen. I don't see how we can talk about socialism when the problem is world distribution. I think this is what Marx meant when he talked about the non-state. I was at Alex Haley's house some time ago, and he talked to me about his search for his past. He found it in Africa, but when he returned there shortly afterward, he was in a state of panic. His village hadn't changed very much, but when he went there, he saw an old man walking down the road, holding something that he cherished to his ear. It was a small transistor radio that was zeroed in on the British Broadcasting Network. What I'm trying to say is that mass media plus the development of transportation make it impossible for us to think of ourselves in terms of separate entities, as nations. Do you realize that it only took me approximately 5 hours to get from San Francisco to here? It only takes 10 hours to get from here to Vietnam. The ruling circle no longer even acknowledges wars. They call them police actions. They call the riots of the Vietnamese people domestic disturbance. What I am saying is that the ruling circle must realize and accept the consequences of what they have done. They know that there is only one world, but they are determined to follow the logic of their exploitation. A short time ago in Detroit, the community was under siege, and now 16 members of the party are in prison. The local police laid siege on that community and that house, and they used the same weapons they use in Vietnam. As a matter of fact, 2 tanks rolled up. The same thing happens in Vietnam because the police are there also. The police are everywhere, and they all wear the same uniform and use the same tools and have the same purpose, the protection of the ruling circle here in North America. It is true that the world is one community, but we are not satisfied with the concentration of its power. We want the power for the people. I said earlier, but I strayed away, that the theory of the negation is valid. Some scholars have been wondering why in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the resistance always seeks the goal of a collective society. They seem not to institute the economy of the capitalist. They seem to jump all the way from feudalism to a collective society, and some people can't understand why. Why won't they follow historical Marxism or historical materialism? Why won't they go from feudalism to the development of a capitalistic base and finally to socialism?
Listen.
They don't do it because they can't do it. They don't do it for the same reason that the black community in Harlem cannot develop capitalism, that the black community in Oakland or San Francisco cannot develop capitalism, because the imperialists have already preempted the field.
Listen.
They have already centralized the wealth. Therefore, in order to deal with them, all we can do is liberate our community and then move on them as a collective force. We've had long arguments with people about our convictions. Before we became conscious, we used to call ourselves a dispersed collection of colonies here in North America. And people argued with me all day and all night asking, how can you possibly be a colony? In order to be a colony, you have to have a nation, and you're not a nation, you're a community. You're a dispersed collection of communities. Because the Black Panther Party is not embarrassed to change or admit error, tonight I would like to accept the criticism and say that those critics were absolutely right. We are a collection of communities, just as the Korean people, the Vietnamese people, and the Chinese people are a collection of communities. A dispersed collection of communities because we have no superstructure of our own. The superstructure we have is the superstructure of Wall Street, which all of our labor produced. This is a distorted form of collectivity. Everything's been collected, but it's used exclusively in the interest of the ruling circle. This is why the Black Panther Party denounces black capitalism and says that all we can do is liberate our community, not only in Vietnam, but here, not only in Cambodia and the People's Republics of China and Korea, but the communities of the world. We must unite as one community and then transform the world into a place where people will be happy, wars will end, the state itself will no longer exist, and we will have communism. But we cannot do this right away. When transformation takes place, when structural change takes place, the result is usually cultural lag. After the people possess the means of production, we will probably not move directly into communism, but linger with revolutionary intercommunalism until such time as we can wash away bourgeois thought, until such time as we can wash away racism and reactionary thinking, until such time as people are not attached to their nation as a peasant is attached to the soil, until such time as that people can gain their sanity and develop a culture that is essentially human, that will serve the people instead of some god. Because we cannot avoid contact with each other, we will have to develop a value system that will help us function together in harmony.
Whoo, that was a deep one. That was good. That was let me go back to that really quick. That was his speech at Boston College, November 18th, 1970. That was Huey's speech at Boston College, November 18th, 1970. And again, he said a lot of facts, especially a lot of things that are relevant today. And you know what's even more important is that he's highlighting the evolution, not just of us as a society, but also of ideology, philosophies, and also how things change politically and geopolitically, right? How what is today may not be tomorrow, and to analyze things and to see how things progress and turn into what it is. It's good to understand philosophies and ideologies, but it's also important to have a reality of certain circumstances and situations, so that way when we applying our practices and our philosophies, it's implemented in a way where it'll work, versus some way that's really what's the word that I'm looking for, non-existent, that's kind of a fantasy or a dream. We have to look at things that's more of a reality and what's able to be accomplished within our society. And like you said, everything takes steps. Nothing's going to happen in drastic changes. We all go through stages, us as individuals. Everything in life, everything on this earth all goes through stages. Philosophies, ideologies, life, people. It all goes through different stages, so we can't think that changing society is going to happen in one reactionary thought. No, it's going to go in different elements, different stages to be able to get from one place to another. I like the fact that he spoke about turning philosophies and ideologies to dogma, and that's what a lot of us tend to do. Sometimes that comes from a lot of individuals that may or may not have as much life experiences as a lot of other people, and they read a lot of these philosophies and ideologies, which sounds amazing, right? And it's not to take away from them, but like what he's getting to, we need to start being able to receive these the literature and this knowledge and this information, and be able to take what we need and leave the rest. A lot of us don't know how to distinguish the tools that we need from a certain toolbox versus taking the whole damn toolbox with us and not knowing which tool to apply in which situation, because we just adopted every goddamn thing, not understanding that every group of people, every individual, every situation, every circumstances is all different. Even when organizing now, in today's activist world with the young lords, Chicago is different than New York. New York is different than Connecticut. Connecticut is different than Florida. They all have different dynamics, different situations, different scenarios. They all got the same objective and the same goals, but the way they attack those issues within their communities may be differently, because the dynamics and situations may be different. But it's very important for them to be able to learn from one another and to be able to take certain tools that they see from their comrades working across state lines and try to implement it in their own way. This is what we have to stop being lazy, especially when we want to start practicing some of these theories. We have to be able to do some of that work, and some of that work is really getting in tune with the people, because like he said, the people at the bottom of the bottom is the ones who's really going to lead the forefront. We got to understand the working class. We got to understand all these different levels and elements of society that really shifts and moves the way it moves. Like, we have to have a full understanding and comprehension of these situations. But I don't want to keep talking. Let's get back into the book. Salute to everybody who pulled up today. We're probably going to do like another chapter or two, so we're probably going to have maybe 2 more sessions. Don't forget, guys, we are live on YouTube, so if you guys missed any of the prior commentary or even some of the book, or you guys want to go to from the beginning of the book to get to where we're at now, it is live on YouTube, so you guys have access to the archive I put together. Yo, thank you for the gift. Salute, TikTok, salute, brother. But everybody on YouTube, go check me out on TikTok. Everybody on TikTok, do me a favor, go subscribe to the YouTube, because a lot of the books that I bring up here to TikTok really restricts me. A lot of the content, a lot of the language, even a lot of the philosophies and ideologies that don't align with certain policies on this app. Just do me a favor so you don't miss out on any of it. Go tap into the YouTube. Let's get back to the book.
Part 3. The Second Wave.
Thank you.
Huey's release from prison in July 1970 marked a period of renewal for the party. Under the counsel of attorney Charles Gary and with the sweeping support of the people, Huey beat the odds and was personally reunited with the party for the first time since 1967. Diminishing the atmosphere of jubilation, however, was the fact that other Black Panther leaders remained imprisoned.
Thank you for the gifts.
Chairman Bobby Seale and Erica Huggins were held on an FBI-inspired murder charge. Black Panther Field Marshal George Jackson was incarcerated in San Quentin Penitentiary, and Eldridge Cleaver was living abroad in political exile. If the conspicuous absence of Huey's most trusted comrades was not in itself an alienating situation, then the many unfamiliar faces that cheered his freedom left him feeling estranged from his own supporters. Recall that the party's ranks swelled as a result of the Free Huey movement, and that the majority of Black Panthers were therefore acquainted with their leader only from his words and pictures in the newspaper. Although a small cadre had worked with Huey from the party's inception, and some of us had even grown up with him, most rank-and-file members had never met Huey, much less knew him intimately. Consequently, his first months back on the streets were a period of familiarization with the very organization he had launched just 4 years earlier.
Listen up.
Whereas Huey's arrest had brought the first wave of political fervor to the Black Panther Party, his release engendered a number of equally historic changes from 1971 to 1972.
a lot of people don't realize Huey was definitely that man, right? He was definitely that guy. But when he went into prison, the spotlight wasn't on him in the public's eye. Like, not that many people were drawn to him until after the campaigning, right? So when he was locked up, and for the whole Free Huey campaigning that Bobby Seale and the rest of the Panthers organized to be able to free Huey, what that did was amplify who he was and amplified his image. So a lot of what he went through, even coming out of prison at this time, was also living up to a name that he wasn't accustomed to at that time. He didn't watch it grow. He didn't slowly ease into that position. He went into prison. He advocated from prison. He tried to organize the inmates in prison. But what really made Huey's name so big was the Free Huey campaign that went globally. This is why we got to understand the importance of international struggle and the intersectionalities between groups and communities that live in the same confines of the states that they're in. So let's tap that screen, share this live, let's get back into it. But like I said, we got to understand his psychological aspect too. So if you really understand what he was going through, like, oh shit, I come out of prison, everybody's looking up to me, everybody's, relying on me. That does a lot to an individual's psyche. That puts him in a position where he feels like he can't make any wrong decisions, or he doesn't want to displease certain individuals, because that might tarnish the reputation that, again, was created due to the Free Huey campaign. Not saying that he's not who he said he was. Listen to the last speech we just listened to. His mind is phenomenal. One of the most intelligent individuals I've ever studied on. But the psyche, guys, when you're not ready for something of that nature, that shit can get to you. Look at a lot of these celebrities and superstars, and look at a lot of these youth celebrities. Look at the psychological that they go through. It's a lot of pressure.
Firstly, he traveled to Africa and Asia, where meetings with Mozambique President Samora Moises Machel and Chinese Premier Chou Enlai, among others, helped inspire Huey's formulation of his groundbreaking philosophy of intercommunalism. As outlined here in a 1971 excerpt from In Search of Common Ground, this far-sighted and prophetic philosophy became the party's official ideology regarding world affairs. Another shift took place in March 1971 when Eldridge resigned from the Panthers. While much scholarly attention has been lavished on this so-called split, his defection, as Huey points out in On the Defection of Eldridge Cleaver from the Black Panther Party and the Defection of the Black Panther Party from the Black Community, in reality had only a minor impact on our operations. More critically, however, Eldridge's departure signaled the need for the party to rebuild its connection to people in the community. Huey's Black Capitalism Reanalyzed and On the Relevance of the Church thus illustrate a renewed commitment to speaking to and meeting the needs of the community on issues outside of the rhetoric of armed revolt. Intercommunalism, February 1971. We, the Black Panther Party, believe that everything is in a constant state of change. So we employ a framework of thinking that can put us in touch with the process of change. That is, we believe that the conclusions at which we arrive will always change, but the fundamentals of the method by which we arrive at our conclusions will remain constant. Our ideology, therefore, is the most important of our thinking. There are many different ideologies or schools of thought, and all of them start with an a priori set of assumptions. Mankind is still limited in its knowledge and finds it hard at this historical stage to talk about the very beginning of things and the very end of things without starting from premises that cannot yet be proved. This is true of both general schools of thought, the idealist and the materialist. The idealists base their thinking on certain presumptions about things of which they have very little knowledge. The materialists like to believe that they are very much in contact with reality, or the real material world, disregarding the fact that they only assume there is a material world. The Black Panther Party has chosen materialist assumptions on which to ground its ideology. This is a purely arbitrary choice. Idealism might be the real happening. We might not be here at all. We don't really know whether we are in Connecticut or in San Francisco, whether we are dreaming and in a dream state, or whether we are awake and in a dream state.
I don't know. I felt like he was talking to me just now because I'm in Connecticut, and now he got me wondering, is this a dream? Am I really on live right now? Am I where I think I am right now?
Perhaps we are just somewhere in a void. We simply can't be sure. But because the members of the Black Panther Party are materialists, we believe that someday scientists will be able to deliver the information that will give us not only the evidence, but the proof that there is a material world and that its genesis was material, motion and matter, not spiritual. Until that time, however, and for the purposes of this discussion, I merely ask that we agree on the stipulation that a material world exists and develops externally and independently of us all.
Listen.
With this stipulation, we have the foundation for an intelligent dialogue. We assume that there is a material world and that it exists and develops independently of us. And we assume that the human organism, through its sensory system, has the ability to observe and analyze that material world. The dialectical materialist believes that everything in existence has fundamental internal contradictions. For example, the African gods south of the Sahara always had at least two heads, one for evil and one for good. Now people create God in their own image. What they think he, for God is always a he in patriarchal societies, is like or should be. So the African said, in effect, I am both good and evil. Good and evil are the two parts of the thing that is me. This is an example of an internal contradiction. Western societies, though, split up good and evil, placing God up in heaven and the devil down in hell. Good and evil fight for control over people in Western religions, but they are two entirely different entities.
Listen.
This is an example of an external contradiction. This struggle between mutually exclusive opposing tendencies within everything that exists explains the observable fact that all things have motion and are in a constant state of transformation. Things transform themselves because while one tendency or force is more dominating than another, change is nonetheless a constant, and at some point the balance will alter and there will be a new qualitative development. New properties will come into existence, qualities that did not altogether exist before. Such qualities cannot be analyzed without understanding the forces struggling within the object in the first place. Yet the limitations and determinations of these new qualities are not defined by the forces that created them. Class conflict develops by the same principles that govern all other phenomena in the material world. In contemporary society, a class that owns a property dominates a class that does not own a property. There is a class of workers and a class of owners, and because there exists a basic contradiction in the interests of those two classes, they are constantly struggling with one another. Now, because things do not stay the same, we can be sure of one thing. The owner will not stay the owner, and the people who are dominated will not stay dominated. We don't know exactly how this will happen, but after we analyze all the other elements of the situation, we can make a few predictions. We can be sure that if we increase the intensity of the struggle, we will reach a point where the equilibrium of forces will change, and there will be a qualitative leap into a new situation with a new social equilibrium. I say leap because we know from our experience of the physical world that when transformations of this kind occur, they do so with great force. These principles of dialectical development do not represent an iron law that can be applied mechanically to the social process. There are exceptions to those laws of development and transformation, which is why, as dialectical materialists, we emphasize that we must analyze each set of conditions separately and make concrete analyses of concrete conditions in each instance. One cannot always predict the outcome, but one can, for the most part, gain enough insight to manage the process.
Right.
The dialectical method is essentially an ideology, yet we believe that it is superior to other ideologies because it puts us more in contact with what we believe to be the real world.
Listen.
It increases our ability to deal with that world and shape its development and change. You could easily say, well, this method may be successfully applied in one particular instance, but how do you know that it is an infallible guide in all cases? The answer is that we don't know. We don't say all cases or infallible guide because we try not to speak in such absolute and inclusive terms.
Listen.
We only say that we have to analyze each instance, that we have found this method the best available in the course of our analyses, and that we think the method will continue to prove itself in the future. We sometimes have a problem because people do not understand the ideology that Marx and Engels began to develop. People say, you claim to be Marxists, but did you know that Marx was a racist? We say, well, he probably was a racist. He made a statement once about the marriage of a white woman and a black man, and he called the black man a gorilla or something like that. The Marxists claim he was only kidding, and that the statement shows Marx's closeness to the man. But of course, that is nonsense. So it does seem that Marx was a racist. If you are a Marxist, then Marx's racism affects your own judgment, because a Marxist is someone who worships Marx and the thought of Marx. Remember, though, that Marx himself said, I am not a Marxist. Such Marxists cherish the conclusions which Marx arrived at through his method, but they throw away the method itself, leaving themselves in a totally static posture. That is why most Marxists really are historical materialists. They look to the past to get answers for the future, and that does not work. If you are a dialectical materialist, however, Marx's racism does not matter. You do not believe in the conclusions of one person, but in the validity of a mode of thought. And we in the party, as dialectical materialists, recognize Karl Marx as one of the great contributors to that mode of thought. Whether or not Marx was a racist is irrelevant and immaterial to whether or not the system of thinking he helped develop delivers truths about processes in the material world. And this is true in all disciplines. In every discipline you find people who have distorted visions and are at a low state of consciousness, who nonetheless have flashes of insight and produce ideas worth considering. For instance, John B. Watson once stated that his favorite pastime was hunting and hanging niggers. Yet he made great forward strides in the analysis and investigation of conditioned responses. Now that I have said a word about the ideology of the party, I am going to describe the history of the party and how we have changed our understanding of the world. When we started in October 1966, we were what one would call black nationalists. We realized the contradictions in society, the pressure on black people in particular, and we saw that most people in the past had solved some of their problems by forming into nations. We therefore argued that it was rational and logical for us to believe that our sufferings as people would end when we established a nation of our own, composed of our own people. After a while, we saw that something was wrong with this resolution of the problem. In the past, nationhood was a fairly easy thing to accomplish. If we look around now, though, we see that the world, the land space, the livable parts as we know them, is pretty well settled. So we realized that to create a new nation, we would have to become a dominant faction in this one, and yet the fact that we did not have power was the contradiction that drove us to seek nationhood in the first place. It is an endless circle, you see. To achieve nationhood, we needed to become a dominant force. But to become a dominant force, we needed to be a nation. So we made a further analysis and found that in order for us to be a dominant force, we would at least have to be great in number. We developed from just plain nationalists or separatist nationalists into revolutionary nationalists. We said that we joined with all of the other people in the world struggling for decolonization and nationhood and called ourselves a dispersed colony because we did not have the geographical concentration that other so-called colonies had. But we did have black communities throughout the country. San Francisco, Los Angeles, New Haven, and there are many similarities between these communities and the traditional kind of colony. We also thought that if we allied with those other colonies, we would have a greater number, a greater chance, a greater force, and that is what we needed, of course, because only force kept us a colonized people.
Really quick, guys, do me a favor. If we could tap the screen and share this live. Let's shake up the algorithm on both platforms. If you could do me that favor, I really appreciate it. I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, free healthcare. So by tapping the screen, sharing this live, it just showing me a little bit of socialist love and support to be able to reach the masses. But let's get back to the book, guys.
We saw that it was not only beneficial for us to be revolutionary nationalists, but to express our solidarity with those friends who suffered many of the same kind of pressures we suffered. Therefore, we changed our self-definitions. We said that we are not only revolutionary nationalists, that is, nationalists who want revolutionary changes in everything, including the economic system the oppressor inflicts upon us, but we are also individuals deeply concerned with the other people of the world and their desires for revolution.
Really quick, just to address the comment. You know what? But this is why I said a lot of people study philosophy and ideology, and they turn it into dogma, not applying the aspect of taking what you need and leaving the rest. And a lot of these individuals live a fictitious, reality that they created in their mind. We're not taking actual reality situations and things that go on in real life and real geopolitical issues. They don't put those components into play. Because a lot of individuals, even when you're speaking about philosophies and ideologies, they're only thinking domestically. But when you have to participate internationally, a lot of those methods that you apply domestically is not going to work internationally. Look at certain nations that we used to label communists or whatever. Look at the way they function on an international scale today. They don't function internationally the way they function domestically. So in reality, are they really that? No. They've evolved. They've fused components of different sectors to be able to participate and compete. And that's why I said we have to understand the global dynamics. We have to understand geopolitics. We have to understand local politics. We have to see the intersectionalities. We have to stop being so quick to throw yourself in a box and throw these labels and sit here and fight and advocate and and you don't have a basic understanding of how the system actually works. How it actually works. That's what I said. I don't knock nobody who wants to label them whatever they want to label themselves. I don't like to be put in a box. I grow and develop every day. I evolve every day. Society evolves every day. Huey just talked about it in his last chapter. We have to learn how to evolve with the times. We have to start being able to distinguish the difference on what's going to work within our communities and what works for someone else. We may be able to take components of what worked for someone else and apply it to what's going on with here. But you can never have a copycat image of whatever it once was because you don't live in those situations, circumstances, and conditions. Those philosophies and ideologies were created to attack a specific issue. Not everybody's in the same situation and scenario. He even spoke about it. Even when you talk about these philosophies and ideologies, a lot of them go out the window. Why? Because we have imperialism. We have empires that supersedes nationalism. We get it? It's a rabbit hole. It's deep. And what's the word that I'm looking for? What I'm telling you guys may not be popular. What I'm saying, a lot of people will reject and go back and forth with me. But I don't want you to think like me. What I want you to do is look outside the box and stop being so quick to label yourself anything before you fully understand how the entire system, not just the United States, the entire global system works, because the global system controls the local systems. We understanding that? That's why I said I don't like to be put in a box. I believe we grow, develop, evolve every fucking day. So why are we so comfortable putting ourselves in a time capsule to apply methods that may or may not work in today's dynamics? How about we take those things and evolve them where it can be effective today? We can apply them where it's going to be successful and be implemented in a way that people will benefit off of these things. But when you try to reenact and do copycat images, you're not going to work. It's not going to work. And I don't shun nobody. I just don't believe in dogma. I don't believe anybody telling me how to think. And I don't believe anybody who doesn't have the full understanding on how the entire global system works really understand how crucial it is when you throw labels on yourself. Because even some of these nations that you model themselves because they had great philosophy and ideologies in the past don't conduct themselves that way today. Just saying. It's the reality. So we understand geopolitics, evolution, and how nations survive or how nations turn into empires. We can have a different conversation where it's at a higher frequency, where a lot of people on the lower frequency not going to get it because they're not privileged to that information. That's what ignorance is, the lack of not knowing. I'm ignorant all the time because I don't know certain things and I learn every day. So we can't get insulted by that. But we have to understand this levels to this shit. Like Huey said in the last chapter, it's levels to this shit.
In order to show this solidarity, we decided to call ourselves internationalists. Originally, as I said, we assumed that people could solve a number of their problems by becoming nations. But this conclusion showed our lack of understanding of the world's dialectical development.
Listen.
Our mistake was to assume that the conditions under which people had become nations in the past still existed.
And that's our biggest problem, is that we don't fully look at things from its full lens. We're only looking at it from a microscopic level, leaving us totally oblivious to everything else that controls our dynamics. Because even now, the nations at an uproar, especially with geopolitical issues, a lot of U.S. citizens are at an uproar and frustrated and pissed the fuck off. But what got us in the situation that we're in, that we're so aggravated and frustrated with the system, is that we didn't pay attention to a lot of geopolitical international treaties and policies that's been going on for so long, that our nation has been put us in a position where we don't want to agree. We don't. Look at today's presidential election, right? And again, I don't like talking about this because, again, this is a very sensitive topic. And if you don't know geopolitical issues, you're really not going to get a full comprehension of even how the fuck we got here from the beginning. But if we start paying attention to a lot of these policies, to a lot of the contracts and who we give what to, we can also see how the United States... Now, I talk about politics and it automatically pops up on TikTok. Learn more about the elections. Come on, guys, stop that. But even if you understand the policies and treaties and how vulnerable the United States put itself when it relies on another nation to do certain things for itself that it could be doing for itself. And this is why I say the United States does a lot of backdooring, especially internationally, where it exploits other nations and where it uses other nations to be able to suppress other nations to be able to extract the resources from. So, not to throw shade on U.S. citizens, but we should have been paying attention to the geopolitical issues and these relationships and these policies and the treaties a long time ago. We don't pay attention until it's something that we do not like. And that is our fault. We don't agree with the situations and circumstances, but we can't act like we're not accountable for giving the blind eye and acting ignorant to something that we need to pay attention to. Because the United States' survival is due to the exploitation of others. So U.S. citizens need to be more knowledgeable on what's going on in the world that the nation that represents them is doing to everybody else. This is why I say geopolitical issues, for me, is one of the most important topics in conversation, especially when we sharing information and history, because the U.S. citizens are only going to understand the lengths of its country's actions when it actually has conversations with individuals from other countries. When you really start understanding who supplies who and what supplies what, it's now that we got TikTok where we at an uproar. But you can go into the Panthers newspaper, you can go into the Young Lords newspaper. They talking about the same thing that's going on today in Palestine with Israel. The same exact thing, word for word, verbatim. But not for nothing, sometimes we put the blind eye and we wait till something gets to the level of reactionary when we want to voice our opinions. But we have to stop allowing it to get there. We have to be more aware of what this government and this nation is doing, because not for nothing, that reflects on us. We are a representation of the nation, whether you want to accept it or not, because when you travel internationally, they hear your accent, they hear the way you talk, you're an American. So everything that your government has done internationally will be reflected in you as a visitor. You got to understand that, whether you want to accept that or not. So conscious awareness is very important, guys. And I know I went on a tangent babble. It's been 6 days, guys. I'm all over the place. I'm like double dutching it right now, trying to find my rhythm and algorithm on this platform. But let's keep it going. Let's tap the screen, share this live. We got about 35 minutes left of this chapter. Let's keep it going.
To be a nation, one must satisfy certain essential conditions. And if these things do not exist or cannot be created, then it is not possible to be a nation. In the past, nation-states were usually inhabited by people of a certain ethnic and religious background. They were divided from other people either by a partition of water or a great unoccupied land space. This natural partition gave the nation's dominant class and the people generally a certain amount of control over the kinds of political, economic, and social institutions they established. It gave them a certain amount of control over their destiny and their territory. They were secure, at least to the extent that they would not be attacked or violated by another nation 10,000 miles away, simply because the means to transport troops that far did not exist. This situation, however, could not last. Technology developed until there was a definite qualitative transformation in the relationships within and between nations. We know that you cannot change a part of the whole without changing the whole, and vice versa.
Listen.
As technology developed and there was an increase in military capabilities and means of travel and communication, nations began to control other countries distant from their own. Usually they controlled these other lands by sending administrators and settlers who would extract labor from the people or resources from the earth, or both.
Yo, really quick, free Puerto Rico.
This is the phenomenon we know as colonialism.
Free Puerto Rico.
The settlers' control over the seized land and people grew to such an extent.
Yo, listen to my buddies out there, and I'm pretty sure, listen, it's not to take away nobody, I'm just Puerto Rican, so you know I gotta highlight Puerto Rico. And this goes to everybody else there who's dealing with colonial superpower, right? Free whatever nation that is subject to colonial rule, and free the homeland Puerto Rico. And I'm going to keep saying that because everything he says, to me, it resonates and is so relevant to what's going on back then, but also will still continue to go on today. So tap that screen, share this live. And I know I'm all over the place. And don't forget, guys, we are live on YouTube. So if you want to be able to go back and catch some of the book and some of the commentary that I've been giving throughout this live, do me a favor, go back and check us out. Don't forget, everybody on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button, please. That shakes up the algorithm and helps me out. I know I got to get used to it because I'm used to TikTok so much. So I got my little, just with this. Now I'm trying to figure out my little comfortability with YouTube. But everybody, tap the screen, share this live. I do got some viewers here on YouTube, but I do got some here on TikTok. So salute to everybody on both platforms. Much love and respect to you guys.
That it wasn't even necessary for the settler to be present to maintain the system. He went back home. The people were so integrated with the aggressor that their land didn't look like a colony any longer. But because their land didn't look like a free state either, some theorists started to call these lands neo-colonies. Arguments about the precise definition of these entities developed. Are they colonies or not? If they aren't, what are they? The theorists knew that something had happened, but they did not know what it was.
Then they turned into colonial territories.
Using the dialectical materialist method, we in the Black Panther Party saw that the United States was no longer a nation.
Nope.
It was something else. It was more than a nation.
It was an empire.
It had not only expanded its territorial boundaries, but it had expanded all of its controls as well. We called it an empire. Now, at one time, the world had an empire in which the conditions of rule were different.
Listen.
The Roman Empire. The difference between the Roman and the American empires is that other nations were able to exist external to and independent of the Roman Empire because their means of exploration, conquest, and control were all relatively limited. But when we say empire today, we mean precisely what we say.
It's a little different.
An empire is a nation state that has transformed itself into a power controlling all the world's lands and people. We believe...
Yo, really quick, if it's lagging here on TikTok, you can also go on to YouTube and go catch me on YouTube. We are live on YouTube, AfroTaino 88. The same here on TikTok, it is on YouTube. So if you're getting glitches and lags, I don't know what's going on with... Well, I do know what's going on with TikTok. It's suppressive. But if you guys want to switch over to YouTube, we are live and in action there as well. So keep tapping the screen, keep sharing this live. Let's keep it a safe and positive space for myself and for everybody joining and everybody that's already here.
There are no more colonies or neo-colonies. If a people is colonized, it must be possible for them to decolonize and become what they formerly were. But what happens when the raw materials are extracted and labor is exploited within a territory dispersed over the entire globe? When the riches of the whole earth are depleted and used to feed a gigantic industrial machine in the imperialist's home, then the people and the economy are so integrated into the imperialist empire that it's impossible to decolonize, to return to the former conditions of existence.
Right.
If colonies cannot decolonize and return to their original existence as nations, then nations no longer exist. Nor, we believe, will they ever exist again. And since there must be nations for revolutionary nationalism or internationalism to make sense, we decided that we would have to call ourselves something new. We say that the world today is a dispersed collection of communities. A community is different from a nation. A community is a small unit with a comprehensive collection of institutions that exist to serve a small group of people.
Listen up.
And we say further that the struggle in the world today is between the small circle that administers and profits from the empire of the United States and the peoples of the world who want to determine their own destinies. We call this situation intercommunalism. We are now in the age of reactionary intercommunalism, in which a ruling circle, a small group of people, control all other people by using their technology. At the same time, we say that this technology can solve most of the material contradictions people face, that the material conditions exist that would allow the people of the world to develop a culture that is essentially human and would nurture those things that would allow the people to resolve contradictions in a way that would not cause the mutual slaughter of all of us. The development of such a culture would be revolutionary intercommunalism. Some communities have begun doing this. They have liberated their territories and have established provisional governments. We recognize them and say that these governments represent the people of China, North Korea, the people in the liberated zones of South Vietnam, and the people in North Vietnam. We believe their examples should be followed so that the order of the day would not be reactionary intercommunalism, empire, but revolutionary intercommunalism. The people of the world, that is, must seize power from the small ruling circle and expropriate the expropriators, pull them down from their pinnacle and make them equals, and distribute the fruits of our labor that have been denied us in some equitable way. We know that the machinery to accomplish these tasks exists, and we want access to it. Imperialism has laid the foundation for world communism, and imperialism itself has grown to the point of reactionary intercommunalism because the world is now integrated into one community. The communications revolution, combined with the expansive domination of the American empire, has created the global village. The peoples of all cultures are under siege by the same forces, and they all have access to the same technologies. There are only differences in degree between what's happening to the blacks here and what's happening to all of the people in the world, including Africans. Their needs are the same and their energy is the same. And the contradictions they suffer will only be resolved when the people establish a revolutionary intercommunalism where they share all the wealth that they produce and live in one world. The stage of history is set for such a transformation. The technological and administrative base of socialism exists. When the people seize the means of production and all social institutions, then there will be a qualitative leap and a change in the organization of society. It will take time to resolve the contradictions of racism and all kinds of chauvinism. But because the people will control their own social institutions, they will be free to recreate themselves and to establish communism, a stage of human development in which human values will shape the structures of society. At this time, the world will be ready for a still higher level of which we can now know nothing. Question. I'm wondering, now that you have established an ideology with which to view the kinds of imperialism going on in the United States, what do you do once the revolution has taken place? What happens once you have taken over the structures made by capitalism and have assumed responsibility for them?
Talk about it.
Aren't you going to encounter the same struggles between the dominant forms of government and the inferior? Newton. It's not going to be the same because nothing remains the same. All things are in a constant state of transformation, and therefore you will have other contradictions inherent in that new phenomenon. We can be very sure that there will be contradictions after revolutionary intercommunalism is the order of the day, and we can even be sure that there will be contradictions after communism, which is an even higher stage than revolutionary intercommunalism. There will always be contradictions, or else everything would stop.
Facts.
So it's not a question of when the revolution comes. The revolution is always going on. It's not a question of when the revolution is going to be. The revolution is going on every day, every minute, because the new is always struggling against the old for dominance. We also say that every determination is a limitation, and every limitation is a determination. This is the struggle of the old and new again, where a thing seems to negate itself. For instance, imperialism negates itself after laying the foundation for communism, and communism will eventually negate itself because of its internal contradictions, and then we'll move to an even higher state. I like to think that we will finally move to a stage called godliness, where man will know the secrets of the beginning and the end, and will have full control of the universe. And when I say the universe, I mean all motion and matter. This is only speculation, of course, because science has not delivered us the answer yet. But we believe that it will in the future. So, of course, there will be contradictions in the future. But some contradictions are antagonistic, and some contradictions are not antagonistic. Usually, when we speak of antagonistic contradictions, we are talking about contradictions that develop from conflicts of economic interest, and we assume that in the future, when the people have power, these antagonistic contradictions will occur less and less. Question. Could you speak to the question of how you are going to expropriate the expropriators when they are the ones with the army and the ones with the police force? Newton. Well, all things carry a negative sign as well as a positive sign. That's why we say every determination has a limitation, and every limitation has a determination. For example, your organism carries internal contradictions from the moment you are born and begin to deteriorate. First, you are an infant, then a small child, then an adolescent, and so on until you are old. We keep developing and burning ourselves out at the same time. We are negating ourselves. And this is just how imperialism is negating itself now. It's moved into a phase we call reactionary intercommunalism, and has thus laid the foundation for revolutionary intercommunalism. Because as the enemy disperses its troops and controls more and more space, it becomes weaker and weaker, you see. And as they become weaker and weaker, the people become stronger and stronger. Question. You spoke of technological differences between the various countries of the world. How are you going to integrate all these countries into intercommunalism if these differences exist?
Listen.
Newton. They are already integrated by the mere fact that the ruling circle has control of all of them. Inside the geographical region of North America, for example, you have Wall Street, you have the big plants in Detroit turning out automobiles, and you have Mississippi, where there are no automobile factories.
Listen up.
Does that mean that Mississippi is not a part of the complete whole? No, it only means that the expropriators have chosen to put automobile plants in Detroit rather than in Mississippi. Instead of producing automobiles, they grow food in Mississippi that makes stronger the hands of people in Detroit or Wall Street. So the answer to your question is that systems are inclusive. Just because you don't have a factory in every single community does not mean that the community is distinct and independent and autonomous, you see. Question. Well then, do you see each of the dispersed communities having certain kinds of things to work out among themselves before they can take part in intercommunalism? Newton. They are part of intercommunalism, reactionary intercommunalism. What the people have to do is become conscious of this condition. The primary concern of the Black Panther Party is to lift the level of consciousness of the people through theory and practice to the point where they will see exactly what is controlling them and what is oppressing them, and therefore see exactly what has to be done, or at least what the first step is. One of the greatest contributions of Freud was to make people aware that they are controlled much of their lives by their unconscious.
Listen.
He attempted to strip away the veil from the unconscious and make it conscious. That's the first step in feeling free, the first step in exerting control. It seems to be natural for people not to like being controlled. Marx made a similar contribution to human freedom, only he pointed out the external things that control people. In order for people to liberate themselves from external controls, they have to know about these controls. Consciousness of the expropriator is necessary for expropriating the expropriator, for throwing off external controls. Question. In the ultimate intercommune, do you see separate geographical defined communities that have had a specific history and a unique set of experiences? Would each community retain some kind of separate identity? Newton. No. I think that whether we like it or not, dialectics would make it necessary to have a universal identity. If we do not have universal identity, then we will have cultural, racial, and religious chauvinism, the kind of ethnocentrism we have now. So we say that even if in the future there will be some small differences in behavior patterns, different environments would all be a secondary thing. And we struggle for a future in which we will realize that we are all Homo sapiens and have more in common than not. We will be closer together than we are now. Question. I would like to return to something we were talking about a minute or two ago. It seems to me that the mass media have, in a sense, psychologized many of the people in our country, our own geographical area, so that they come to desire the controls that are imposed upon them by the capitalist system. So how are we going to fight this revolution if a great number of people, in this country at least, are in fact psychologically part of the ruling class? Newton. Part of or controlled by? Question. Well, part of in the psychological sense, because they are not really in power. It's a psychological way of talking about the middle class. Do you have any feelings on that? Newton. First, we have to understand that everything has a material basis, and that our personalities would not exist, what others call our spirit or our mind would not exist, if we were not material organisms. So to understand why some of the victims of the ruling class might identify with the ruling circle, we must look at their material lives. And if we do, we will realize that the same people who identify with the ruling circle are also very unhappy. Their feelings can be compared to those of a child. A child desires to mature so that he can control himself, but he believes he needs the protection of his father to do so. He has conflicting drives. Psychologists would call this conflict neurotic if the child were unable to resolve it. In a sense, then, that is what we are all about. First, people have to be conscious of the ways they are controlled. Then we have to understand the scientific laws involved. And once that is accomplished, we can begin to do what we want, to manipulate phenomena. Question. But if the opposing forces at this point include a very large number of people, including most of the middle classes, then where will the revolutionary thrust come from? Newton. I see what you are getting at. That thrust will come from the growing number of what we call unemployables in this society. We call blacks and third world people in particular, and poor people in general, unemployables because they do not have the skills needed to work in a highly developed technological society. You remember my saying that every society, like every age, contains its opposite. Feudalism produces capitalism, which wiped out feudalism, and capitalism produces socialism, which will wipe out capitalism. Now, the same is true of reactionary intercommunalism. Technological development creates a large middle class, and the number of workers increases also. The workers are paid a good deal and get many comforts, but the ruling class is still only interested in itself. They might make certain compromises and give a little. As a matter of fact, the ruling circle has even developed something of a social structure or welfare state to keep the opposition down. But as technology develops, the need for workers decreases. It has been estimated that 10 years from now, only a small percentage of the present workforce will be necessary to run the industries. Then what will happen to your worker who is now making $4 an hour? The working class will be narrowed down. The class of unemployables will grow because it will take more and more skills to operate those machines and fewer people. And as these people become unemployables, they will become more and more alienated. Even socialist compromises will not be enough. You will then find an integration between, say, the black unemployable and the white racist hard hat who is not regularly employed and mad at the blacks who he thinks threaten his job. We hope that he will join forces with those people who are already unemployable, but whether he does or not, his material existence will have changed. The proletarian will become the lumpen proletarian. It is this future change, the increase of the lumpen proletariat and the decrease of the proletariat, which makes us say that the lumpen proletariat is the majority and carries the revolutionary banner. Question. I'd like to ask you a question about the party. You said that you see the Black Panther Party as primarily a force to educate people, raise their consciousness, end their oppression, and so on. Do you see the party as educating black people specifically or as educating everybody? Newton. We say that black people are the vanguard of the revolution in this country, and since no one will be free until the people of America are free, that black people are the vanguard of world revolution. We don't say this in a boasting way. We inherit this legacy primarily because we are the last, you see, and as the saying goes, the last will be the first. We believe that black Americans are the first real internationalists, not just the Black Panther Party, but black Americans. We are internationalists because we have been internationally dispersed by slavery, and we can easily identify with other people in other cultures. Because of slavery, we never really felt attached to the nation in the same way that the peasant was attached to the soil in Russia. We are always a long way from home. And finally, the historical condition of black Americans has led us to be progressive. We've always talked equality, you see, instead of believing that other people must equal us. What we want is not dominance, but for the yoke to be released. We want to live with other people. We don't want to say that we are better. In fact, if we suffer a fault, it is that we tend to feel we are worse than other people because we have been brainwashed to think that way. So these subjective factors, based on the material existence of black people in America, contribute to our vanguard position. Now, as far as the party is concerned, it has been exclusively black so far. We are thinking about how to deal with the racist situation in America and the reaction black people in America have to racism. We have to get to the black people first because they were carrying the banner first, and we try to do everything possible to get them to relate to us. Question. You were saying something a while ago about the problem of simplifying your ideology for the masses. Could you say a little more about it? Newton. Yes, that's our big burden. So far I haven't been able to do it well enough to keep from being booed off the stage, but we are learning. I think one way to show how dialectics works is to use practical example after practical example. The reason I am sometimes afraid to do that is that people will take each example and think, well, if this is true in one case, then it must be true in all other cases. If they do that, then they become historical materialists, like most Marxist scholars and most Marxist parties. These scholars and parties don't really deal in dialectics at all. Or else they would know that at this time the revolutionary banner will not be carried by the proletarian class, but by the lumpen proletariat.
Listen.
Question. Talking about contradictions, one of the most obvious contradictions within the black community is the difference in outlook between the black bourgeoisie and the black lower class. How do you raise the level of consciousness in the community to the point where the black bourgeoisie sees its own interests as being the same as those of the lower class? Newton. Well, we are again dealing with attitudes and values that have to be changed. The whole concept of the bourgeoisie, black bourgeoisie, is something of an illusion. It's a fantasy bourgeoisie, and this is true of most of the white bourgeoisie too. There are very few controllers even in the white middle class. They can barely keep their heads above water. They are paying all the bills, living hand to mouth, and they have the extra expense of refusing to live like black people, you see. So they are not really controlling anything. They are controlled. In the same way, I don't recognize the black bourgeoisie as different from any other exploited people. They are living in a fantasy world, and the main thing is to instill consciousness, to point out their real interests, their objective and true interests, just as our white progressive and radical friends have to do in the white community. Question. How do you go about raising the level of consciousness in the black community? Educationally, I mean, do you have formal programs of instruction? Newton. Well, we saw a need to formalize education because we didn't believe that a haphazard kind of learning would necessarily bring about the best results. We also saw that the so-called halls of learning did nothing but miseducate us. They either drove us out or kicked us out. They did me both ways. So what we are trying to do is structure an educational institution of our own. Our first attempt along these lines is what we call our ideological institute. So far we have about 50 students, and these 50 students are very, well, may I say very unique students, because all of them are brothers and sisters off the block. What I mean is that they are lumpen proletarians. Most of them are kickouts and dropouts. Most of them left school in the 8th, 9th, or 10th grade. And those few who stayed all the way didn't learn how to read or write, just as I didn't learn until I was about 16. But now they are dealing with dialectics, and they are dealing with science. They study physics and mathematics so that they can understand the universe. And they are learning because they think it is relevant to them now. They will relate this learning back to the community, and the community will in turn see the need for our program. It's very practical and relates to the needs of the people in a way that makes them receptive to our teachings and helps open their eyes to the fact that the people are the real power. They are the ones who will bring about change, not us alone. A vanguard is like the head of a spear, the thing that goes first. But what really hurts is the butt of the spear, because even though the head makes the necessary entrance, the back part is what penetrates. Without the butt, a spear is nothing but a toothpick. Question. What about Malcolm X University? Would you say that it has value? Newton. The whole issue is, who is in control? We, the Black Panther Party, control our ideological institute. If the people, and when I say the people I mean the oppressed people, control Malcolm X University, if they control it without reservation or without having to answer for what is done there or who speaks there, then Malcolm X University is progressive. If that is not the case, then Malcolm X University, or any university by any other name, is not progressive. I like its name, though. Question. The thing I don't understand is, if unity of identity is going to exist in revolutionary intercommunalism, then what will be the contradictions that produce further change? It seems to me that it would be virtually impossible to avoid some contradictions. Newton. I agree with you. You cannot avoid contradictions. You cannot avoid the struggle of opposite tendencies within the same wholes.
Facts.
But I can't tell you what the new opposites will be because they are not in existence yet. See what I mean? Question. I guess so. But how does all that fit in with your idea of a unified identity? Newton. Well, in the first place, we do not deal in panaceas. The qualitative leap from reactionary intercommunalism to revolutionary intercommunalism will not be the millennium. It will not immediately bring into being either a universal identity or a culture that is essentially human. It will only provide the material base for the development of those tendencies. When the people seize the means of production, when they seize the mass media and so forth, you will still have racism. You will still have ethnocentrism. You will still have contradictions. But the fact that the people will be in control of all the productive and institutional units of society, not only factories, but the media too, will enable them to start solving these contradictions. It will produce new values, new identities. It will mold a new and essentially human culture as the people resolve old conflicts based on cultural and economic conditions. And at some point, there will be a qualitative change, and the people will have transformed revolutionary intercommunalism into communism. We call it communism because at that point in history, people will not only control the productive and institutional units of society, but they will also have seized possession of their own subconscious attitudes toward these things. And for the first time in history, they will have a more rather than less conscious relationship to the material world. People, plants, books, machines, media, everything in which they live. They will have power, that is, they will control the phenomena around them and make it act in some desired manner, and they will know their own real desires. The first step in this process is the seizure by the people of their own communities. Let me say one more thing, though, to get back to your question. I would like to see the kind of communism I just described come into being, and I think it will come into being. But that concept is so far from my comprehension that I couldn't possibly name the contradictions that will exist there, although I'm sure that the dialectics will go on. I'll be honest with you, no matter how I read it, I don't understand it. Question. But I still don't see where the contradictions are going to come in. Newton. I can't see them either because they are not in existence yet. Only the basis for them is in existence. And we can't talk about things in the blue, things we don't know anything about. Philosophers have done that too much already.
Facts.
Question. You were talking about this ideology of intercommunalism as part of the program of the Black Panther Party and telling us that the idea is to strive for unity of identity. Yet a few minutes ago you mentioned that the party only accepts blacks as members. That sounds like a contradiction to me. Newton. Well, I guess it is. But to explain it, I would have to go back to what I said earlier. We are the spearhead most of the time, and we try not to be too far ahead of the masses of the people, too far ahead of their thinking. We have to understand that most of the people are not ready for many of the things that we talk about. Now, many of our relationships with other groups, such as the white radicals with whom we have formed coalitions, have been criticized by the very people we are trying to help. For example, our offer of troops to the Vietnamese received negative reaction from the people. And I mean from truly oppressed people. Welfare recipients wrote letters saying, "I thought the party was for us. Why do you want to give those dirty Vietnamese our lifeblood?" I would agree with you and call it a contradiction, but it is a contradiction we are trying to resolve. You see, we are trying to give some therapy, you might say, to our community and lift their consciousness. But first, we have to be accepted. If the therapist is not accepted, then he can't deliver the message. We try to do whatever is possible to meet the patient on the grounds that he or she can best relate to because, after all, they are the issue. So I would say that we are being pragmatic in order to do the job that has to be done. And then, when that job is done, the Black Panther Party will no longer be the Black Panther Party. Question. That brings up a related question in my mind. How do you view the struggles of women and gay people right now? I mean, do you see them as an important part of the revolution? Newton. We think it is very important to relate to and understand the causes of the oppression of women and gay people. We can see that there are contradictions between the sexes and between homosexuals and heterosexuals, but we believe that these contradictions should be resolved within the community. Too often, so-called revolutionary vanguards have tried to resolve these contradictions by isolating women and gay people, and of course, this only means that the revolutionary groups have cut themselves off from one of the most powerful and important forces among the people. We do not believe that the oppression of women or gays will end by the creation of separate communities for either group. We see that as an incorrect idea, just like the idea of a separate nation. If people want to do it, all right, but it won't solve their problems. So we try to show people the correct way to resolve these problems. The vanguard has to include all the people and understand their defects. On the defection of Eldridge Cleaver from the Black Panther Party and the defection of the Black Panther Party from the black community. April 7th.
We gonna end it out right there because it went into the next chapter, but I didn't want it to finish off the way it did because it kind of overlapped. Yeah, I really appreciate everybody who tapped in this afternoon. I know it was a late start, but I really appreciate everybody. Don't forget to go check out the YouTube AfroTaino 88. It's the same way it's on TikTok. It's the same way it is on YouTube. You guys can be able to go catch up whatever you guys missed. Go look at some of the prior chapters and always go re-listen to some stuff, especially if you found the book interesting. Or even, you know, my little spews on here. If you find it entertaining, listen, go back and listen to me. Again, I'm not a teacher, so I'm not gonna be the most I'm probably not going to be the most scholarly all the time, but again, I am a student passing on information that I acquired throughout my, research and throughout my journey. So with that, I really appreciate everybody tapping in. Don't forget, we are going to the Marco Sanchez Community Center from October 6th to the 15th. I keep switching the dates because I'm leaving on the 5th. But if anybody want to help, contribute, donate, you guys can go check out the GoFundMe. The link is in the bio. All gifts and donations that I receive on my platform, even the subscriptions, will be going to the Marco Sanchez Community Center. So again, if you guys want to help, participate, share it up, hit me up. You guys want to come and volunteer, you can do that too. We're always welcome to have some more hands to be able to help us out. We got a couple of other projects too in Puerto Rico, but they're like one-day projects. But the main project for us is the Marco Sanchez Community Center. So I'm going to keep pushing them. I would love for people to go take their time and go Google them, research them, and see what kind of things they're doing in-house. Again, the Young Lords Back to Boarding Camp project is just our contributions to these facilities and establishments that need the help and don't get the financial support that they're supposed to be getting, especially from the government and the politicians that run their local cities. So if you guys could go help us out, I muchly appreciate it. But without further ado, everyone, I'm gonna get the out of here. I gotta do. So do you. But like I always tell everybody, stay positive and productive. Don't allow anybody to dictate the rest of your day. And if you gotta close the door behind you, lock that shit, kick that shit, and keep that shit pushing. Cause nobody should have enough control over you that'll fuck up your whole day. You got full control of that. Peace, blessings, positivity. I'm going to catch you guys tomorrow.
1971.
Ooh, I pressed play. I wasn't meaning to do that.